Awesome. Okay, so style stage. I am super excited that you are joining. And this was a crazy idea that was born a week ago. Um, for those of you that have been on the web for 7 or more years, you and have been part of the front end and web design world in that time, you may be familiar with a site called CSS Zen Garden. Could have opened that, so let's look at that. So CSS Zen Garden was created by Dave Day, and it took submissions from 2003 to 2013. And by submissions, I mean that contributors could create their own style sheet, restyle this HTML. So you see folks that we still very much look up to today, at least in my world, for example, Design System and Mall stands out to me. But there's over 200 submissions in Garden. And so the idea here was to, he puts it best, the idea is that it's a demonstration of what can be accomplished through CSS-based design. So I've been thinking about how we've kind of gotten away from the basics, forgotten how to work with the cascade, and we're choosing frameworks. And I myself work on a design system. And these are not wrong tools. In fact, they serve a place. But as I was thinking about this, the first project that I started working on this modern CSS solutions. And that was my way of looking out at the field of being and kind of thinking there's some holes here in the understanding as we choose frameworks and offer design systems. And a lot of that came through myself trying to educate fellow team members on how to use our design system. And although we were delivering components, there's still a gap for a lot of folks who aren't familiar with how to customize those styles. And that's still a necessity they need to be able to do their goals for their UI to provide the best user experience. And certainly a sub goal and an emphasis for me is accessibility. So that's another gap I see just in general of knowledge that can relate back to CSS for sure. So modern CSS starts to kind of explore topics very specifically and how you can potentially learn some new properties to help you upgrade CSS skills for those scenarios. I was thinking about all these things, and articles didn't seem to be quite enough. Articles are not, so they're written in tutorial format on modern CSS. They're not fully an invitation to learn and to upgrade your skills. So that's what kind of made me start to recall Zen Garden. And so I put out a poll on Twitter and just kind of testing the waters. And that was a week ago, this July 2nd. Basically ask, would you contribute to CSS Zen Garden? And there was a significant amount of which was fair. Again, this project, Zen Garden, was finished taking submissions in 2013. But it was enough interest for me to be like, okay, let's at least throw this out there and really see if you're interested in contributing. That's how Style Stage came to be. It's built on 11D. So another thing that enabled me to create this pretty quickly was, yeah, I'm going to talk about that. So another thing that enabled me to create this pretty quickly, use of 11D. If you've been following me on Twitter for a couple months, I'm pretty strongly into 11D these days on personal projects. Also, I built modern CSS Solutions with. It's a static site generator. So it's extremely perfect for this project where definitely don't want JavaScript. I also write React, not anti-JavaScript. But anyway, it was perfect for this project. There's a lot of performance benefits, and this is truly static content, all things considered for the project. I had created a starter using 11D. So I was able to use that to get some of that stuff out of the way related to and those fiddly bits and just start creating. So more about how Style Stage works. So the page that you see here, which by the way, as part of launch, you're now live at stylestage.dev. For my early contributors, we had a preview link subdomain now at the .dev. So you can go visit that now. So I opened up and talking about CSS Zen Garden. I think in a tweet yesterday promoting this stream, I said I was reanimating the spirit of CSS Zen Garden. And I hope you find that here. But what Style Stage, as I continued concepting the project and what is beneficial to highlight in creating forward steps in the modern web. And it's CSS, yes. And it's learning about new CSS properties. Listed some here. Again, some of these came out of a fantastic Twitter thread where I asked for more ideas of things folks consider modern CSS. And that a little bit. So it's to highlight those properties, but also to emphasize, the guidelines emphasize that your style sheet performant gave a pretty generous load time actually of 3 seconds. And that was in consideration that folks might want to try bringing in imagery, SVG, and so forth. And because one of the limitations currently is that you're only supplying a style sheet and not supplying the assets directly, that that I know increase your page load time depending on your routing to get those, of course. So 3 seconds is a little bit more generous than I would budget for a site where everything was local, but that's why you'll see that. But also considering accessibility. So in the guidelines, really the only guidelines that impact what you do with your design are that it should be responsive, passes accessible contrast, and that if you do use animations, which is fine, that you remove those via prefers reduce mode. If you're not familiar with that, there's an example in for styles, and that is actually from Andy Bell's Modern CSS Reset. So, sorry, that was a lot of things jammed into one sentence. Glad you like restrictions. I think the restrictions are interesting. It also, at first I was like, oh, is this too much? Does this feel like you're restyling SharePoint or something like that? But I think it helps contribute to this idea of challenging yourself to go back to those basics, to get closer to the cascade, to really consider what inheritance means, to stretch your knowledge of pseudo selectors. Actually, all the stuff I just mentioned. Just rolled out the completed resources page, and there are some tips in here where I again say, become one with the cascade. Favorite phrase. I need the opportunity to learn more about CSS selectors. I really love this little game. I'm going to point it out to you. I guess. It's extremely well done. It's a game sort of like in the vein of Flexbox Froggy or Grid Garden, where you progress by correctly typing in the CSS selectors. Highly recommend, because you're going to need them if you want to contribute to Style Stage. There's only a handful of IDs. Back to the main. A handful of IDs and classes. I'm also Chrome Canary to eliminate things getting in the way. So there's only a handful of IDs and classes. Mostly the IDs are primarily for the anchor link. And then where anchor links are not what's needed, then we bring in a few classes. Minimal hooks. The other thing I didn't want to include was, and took kind of a balance to find, is not overly imposing any opinions on naming conventions. So, whereas normally, even for classes, I personally have a preference for them. I just kept it very, very straight. Just all this. I don't know what they call it even. There's dashes. um, so very minimal. It will take in a lot of. You'll get very comfortable with the inspector. You likely already are if you're doing um, work with CSS, but particularly for this project because um, you're going to have to first find out what the classes are, find out what the structure is, and build your selectors. Happening comments about 11D, and to wrap this up on at the end of the stream, we're going to add one little feature in 11D just kind of to show off that a bit, just because I love it so much. So return to the stream later if you would like to check that out. Else, or are there any questions for our project, how it's built, over more in depth on contributing as well? Cool. So let's talk about contributing. So once you come out to talk more about how you built all this in about a week. Yeah, so you can actually super peek behind the scenes by checking out the repo. Of course, that's all open. And yeah, the automation for PRs. Okay, I was a little bit pleased with that, to be honest. The automation part specifically is possible because it is hosted on Netlify. So that means when a PR comes in, it creates a branch, a live branch preview of that, which means it fully tests the contributed style sheet. Thanks to 11D. Thanks, Eva. Actually, you know what? Let me go over contributions super fast and we will totally revisit how the site is built because I am more than happy to talk about that. So, contributions. The steps are pretty basic in terms of the literal steps to go through. First, download the source files. You can also jump to the code pin. And when you do that, this is up to date as long as I remember to do it. So it is up to date with the launch site. And so you can go ahead and start editing. Of course, this is under my code pin. What you'll likely want to do is because I'm not logged in. If you're logged in to CodePen, you have a fork option. So that would create it in your account. I think actually as soon as you start editing and save, that will also create a fork automatically for you. So this gives you kind of a behind the scenes about how Style Stage, I called my theme main stage, is constructed. And you can start with a completely blank style sheet. Delete this out and get after it, which I highly recommend. I think that's part of the learning process, at least from my philosophical view of this project. For example, color variables are something I learned new just for this project. Very aware of them, had done some research, but didn't have a chance to use them yet. And so this was the perfect chance. And I love them. They were great. I particularly love that when you go through and like start to inspect and enjoy doing a little manipulation in the inspector as well, that something like in Chrome, it's going to auto complete those available variables for you, which is pretty cool when you're just kind of poking at it and deciding how you want your style to be. The other thing included in the course, as I mentioned, is a modified version of the CSS reset. Main reason it's modified is Andy Bell. You may have heard he's pretty prolific in the community. His most recent thing is CSS, and it's his own kind of opinionated way of writing styles. I don't say opinionated to be negative. I just mean it's a new way to think about writing your style, similar to BIM. And so I removed some stuff that were kind of a little more specific to that, since they weren't on those. No. But it's a nice starting point. I recommend if you're not used to having a reset. That said, are on CodePen. Since that reset is in use, the CodePen here is not pulling in normalize as a possibility. So you're welcome to use normalize. You're welcome to use whatever you want. Just kind of running through the features list in case you'd like to keep as a starting point. So the other option that you have, besides the direct downloads, really are, there's a launch a file download, or the CodePen is, you can go out to the repo and you could fork it prior to when you're ready to submit your style sheet. And you could fork it and pull out the original Sass if that's how you write styles. And again, you can completely change how those are constructed, but they might at least help you make sense of the structure of the HTML, provide some hints on how you could construct selectors, again, given the lack of classes and IDs. So lots of options, modern options for you to choose how to interact with the source files and create your project. Okay, so once you have your style sheet created, you need to be able to place it. Browser support. Yeah, good point. So in the guidelines, a couple points about that. So really the only one I put here is together. If you're using really cutting edge properties, for example, on this theme, if you're using something like Gap with the intention that it's used for Flexbox Gap, extremely cutting edge, definitely not in all browsers today. It'll be soon. You might want to consider providing a fallback. That is your choice. I strongly encourage it if it's going to impact the user, particularly relating to, that's what's listed here. It should generally work across the modern browsers. And everyone's come across this, but in case not, the best way to check something like that is Can I, or MDN would be the other one I highly recommend. And so you can see, like, for example, Gap property for Firefox. Does that help on the browser support question? So kind of related to that, the guidelines are intended to push you towards, again, performance styles, towards being inclusive of users, whether that's accessible or being considerate of devices and things like that. So, but style page is not a beauty, right? It's intended to be a playground. It's something where you can learn in public, which I say that meaning you have the opportunity to increase your own CSS skills by playing with this, but also to provide a resource that others can learn from by inspecting your files. Will it be certified? Oh, yes. Yes. So what happens is it gets into the build, which is important to know. So when you have your style sheet all ready, it needs to be placed at a public URL. And so below the guidelines, I have some FAQs. And so a public URL means that at least some common options would be that it can be on your own domain, or it can also be in GitHub. The only thing to note there is it needs to be the raw version, which out to. So there's this raw button here. That way it's directly to the actual file itself and not the GitHub view of it. You can use that raw link. You can also actually, one of the contributors is once you have your pin created, which is just a private pin, and I'm plugged in, but I need to do that. So once you have your pin and a public link, you can actually just drop in .css, and that gets you the raw CSS file, which is pretty awesome. So that's another opportunity. The code pin as a starting point, and you don't have to export it somewhere else. So you have your style out there, and what happens during the build process is that the using Puppeteer, there might be a more efficient way to do that, especially as the contributions grow. Puppeteer is going to go out, it's going to scrape that link for the style content. It's going to also look at the metadata that you provide, which I'll about in a minute. And it's going to inject the license, the Creative Commons license. You retain copyright over your graphics, and then it adds the title, your author name, website if you provide it, your Twitter if you provide it, and then the link back to view the public link on StyleStage. So it grabs that all out, creates the file with it, which is available in source style CSS, which is code I can't show you in the browser, but those are then made available in GitHub. But then for the actual build part, it will then look at those styles and it will in the public folder, so that's the live served folder. Once it hits that, it makes the styles available in their unminified form so that they're available at that view style sheet link when you're checking out of somebody's page on StyleStage. That's the unminified view. But on the page itself, random, it becomes on the build. It will then convert this to the minified version. You can see my going out to scrape those. It also, during the build, it creates preview links, which I'm trying to work out how to enable preview that. Oh, sound is cutting out, sorry. Slouching. Okay, so now here's the build version. So it's been minified. But again, the unminified version is available publicly from that view style sheet link. That may seem a little strange. I did get some feedback on that. That's totally fair. Oh, Marianne. Of course, skip down to the part. So this currently staged style. So this view style sheet jumps you out to that live unminified version. Again, this main goal of the site is as a both for folks who contribute and folks who visit to learn the new things. So when you inspect, that's still gonna work as you anticipate. The feedback was that then it's gonna map to kind of a weird location, and I totally respect that. I'm open to ideas, and the fact of it being kind of all static and hosted on Netlify. So far, all of these are loading in under one awesome caveat. That's my metric on fiber. However, I did do some tests with web page test, and it was similar results around 1 second. So, so far that's not been a too big of an impact. We could possibly look at instead of minifying in the head to do the external style sheet just to make the inspector view a little easier to figure out where that style is coming from. Open to feedback on that. Kind of needs to be looked into it. In balance kind of decision project. Hard to structure my CSS and Sass from scratch. Yeah, so, and it's going to be even a different mental mode for this particular project. This idea of going back to the basics and working with the cascade. I would strongly suggest looking at the ones that are out here already and kind of seeing how they've approached attaching styles to things. You can also, if you would like, go to the style stage repo, and I would say I change my mind a little bit, at least with every project. But in terms of the Sass, you can kind of see how that's broken up. And I definitely did it different for this project. Whereas normally, if I have control of the HTML, I'm really thinking in components, and that's how I'm going to structure. So I'm going to have like a card. In this case, my approach was more by section. Um, once again, because of um, limitations on what I can attach to from a selector point of view. So I don't know. In a way, this is a good example of or one example of working with the HTML, working with the cascade. So then when you view a page that brings it all together, I would say the most important things in consideration of the cascade is keeping my theme file. So that has all my CSS variables up, which ultimately those flow into the root element. So that's a little bit different thing. But having the reset before all the rest of the styles would be cascade. But from there, the only other two important ones that order really mattered was typography and layout. And then after that, it kind of, for this project, I structured it in literal visual order. And for a single page site, that can make sense. Not using a framework or other things. So from my own perspective, it can be a little bit project by project. If you're using a framework, there would be reasons you might approach that differently. Mostly because you have opinions kind of already given to you away. Happy to talk more about that. I've been toying with the idea of writing an article about it, but again, I approach it so differently depending on context. Context is everything for that question. Okay. So I'm not sure I completely got through contributing. Let me check. Oh yeah, so the last important part is creating your pull request. To actually add your information so that Style Stage can get your style sheet. So for those who are unfamiliar with how that's done, you will visit the Style Stage repo. You can get to that from, yes, this is out to it. Yeah, so that's going to be your best link out to it. And if you're planning to use the Sass, again, you can do this right away. If you're only coming here to contribute your style sheet, you could do it at the end of your project. But the steps that you would take would be to fork the project. You can fork the design, and once you have your fork version, which you can actually do all of this online, so you don't even have to super know about GitHub or version control or do anything with terminal at all. Once you have your fork available, you can go to source, add a styles, and right in the browser, you can do say edit this file. I would suggest copying the most recent one. The feature slot is something reserved for myself, so if you add it, I'd ask you to read it. Ready to update the feature and add your information. And then you would submit that as a pull request, which I ended up listing out those steps on the guidelines page under the FAQs. How do I create a pull request? Again, I can't 100% demonstrate that since I don't work, but actually gives you a link directly to your page. And once you have an active fork, that will get you right where you need to go to complete starting your pull request. Then I will check it out. And what will happen is, it's helpful to me. You should look it out, but it's helpful to me if you identify which theme, the title of your theme. Keep calling it theme, but your style sheet. And this was a currently active one, would be a little more prominent. But the last one is the deploy preview. So it actually gives you, like I said, thanks to being hosted on Netlify, a live link you can go view your style sheet. And I'll reemphasize that in my comment back to you. I'll provide a little bit of feedback if needed. Um, so far, the feedback has been if I find a contrast issue, if there's something quick and easy to resolve related to responsiveness. Um, else? Any other guidelines that are missed that are um, of any priority? Um, I'm not going to comment on your design specifically. As I mentioned earlier, this is not a beauty contest. This is for you to express yourself and learn more about CSS. So don't feel that um, there's any expectation on design necessarily. What I found really interesting in that regards, which we should definitely go over the existing styles, um, is that folks have been really gravitating towards gradients and transform skew. Those are probably the most used styles so far. And that's awesome. I mean, you don't get an opportunity to use those very much. So I totally understand the desire to break that out. Get them. This one's taking a more elegant approach. Some interesting things with um, custom list styles. This one's super transformy. I love it. I love the depth that's represented here. Very fun. Down to these sections. Got a nice hover effect to make it more readable. So those little tweaks. Again, the design itself doesn't matter as much as what you learn, what you're able to experiment with, and that this project in some small way helps you grow. That's what it's here for. That's the goal. Which is, of course, custom fonts. Loaded from Google right now. In the future, we might allow asset uploading. It was noted that there might be a CORS concern and what your style is or font is. You can also see that it's gonna, as a user approaching this site, it's gonna tell you which ones you've used, and that's a little trick I learned from Una, and visited states are a tricky one. Anyway, I'm just gonna leave it at that. You should check that out. I will find her link to post as well. I mentioned that stuff like that is fun to find things that you can provide as functional value from just CSS alone. Let's see, we didn't. Loving the purple. So I'm going to take a look at it. I'm going to make sure that everything is readable, leads accessibility. I'm going to make sure it's reasonably responsive. All the particular design choices around responsiveness are up to you. I may point out if it feels like it was just kind of an accidental miss. I'll at least bring it to your attention. Always up to you what you resolve. Last one, I love the name, Vaporware. loving this style of buttons. As you can see, there's you can take this design however you want. It does not matter. The other super important thing is it does not matter what your skill set. In fact, you could submit a style sheet, and because you retain control over that source, if you modify it, well, you can modify it anytime, and you will not have to make a new pull request. System will scrape, it will identify that a change was made, and as I see that in the version history, I'll double check that no guidelines were violated. And if not, it'll just get rebuilt the next build. And so really this is an opportunity that you can continue to grow with. You can also submit multiple style sheets. Again, the beauty of the entire site being static, run through GitHub, hosted on Netlify. Don't really have a limit here. It could get real crazy. One improvement I'm looking at making in the near future is actually pulling in a preview thumbnail type of a view for the all styles to make it a little more viewable. I don't have any plans for pagination yet. Kind of gonna take it and see how many submissions really come in. Kind of handle it as I need to. So 11D. I think I just am an 11D evangelist at this. So Um, could not mention it. So the feature that I want to add is we have the README tool. I think for this project, it makes a lot of sense that there's an index available via GitHub to tell you what styles are available. Because again, when I do the local build um, and it scrapes the styles, it pulls in all the contributor styles so that those get pushed up to GitHub as well. Enable that as a viewing mechanism. What I want to do and what 11D make possible is outside of the README, I want an additional Markdown file that just lists all the contributors. There'll be a list similar to what's shown kind of in the cards on the All Styles page where it has the link out to them and their author name. So what I can do, 11D will allow me to call this X. What 11D will allow me to do, I'm going to borrow from file just to move this over, is you can output any file type, any location in the system. So creating a file doesn't mean that the only thing you can do, create a file that's intended to go on your public site and live as HTML. So I can actually, I'm kind of down a couple levels here. The permalink here should relative to your input directory, which customize my input directory. So we're going to say that this file is going to be outside of that at MD. And this next line is important for this particular use case. Exclude from collection. So in other words, it's not content that I want to be available, like queryable in the rest of the site. Okay, so now that 11T is running, I haven't saved this file yet. Once it's created my new. Okay, so that's not too impressive on its own. The more important part is that we want to loop through our authors, which, that data is nicely located as. And so since it's within our data folder, which is affected directory in 11D, it is available anywhere else as data. So the file I created is a nunjuck file. And so it offers the opportunity to do a for loop. I'm going to say file So that loop looked at this style JSON. Right now, it's just outputting the author. See, cool, that worked. Had a title here. Again, I'm writing Markdown because I've defined that the file type should be Markdown. If you are in VS Code, I learned this trick recently. I'm going to right-click on tab. You can say Open Preview, and you can get a Markdown preview. Super helpful to make sure that our formatting how we intend. So I don't just want styles author, that particular thing to be by. First thing I want here, create a link for style sheet. Name, link, that to go. So this one, we actually want that to go to the GitHub link since this index is intended to be within the repo. Grab that real quick where I have it. Okay, so I want it to go to the GitHub repo. Does anybody know if I could actually make this relative? Let me know. Watch for that, since it would be a GitHub page that you're viewing. Anyway, so / and then style.url, or excuse me, style.title. And with 11D, I have a filter, or there is a filter I've modified additionally called slug. Fine. Cool. So now we have a list of styles as down file that will automatically update with every build, which is a huge benefit. You could do something similar for your README to like post your version number, whatever you want. But this feature of 11D to make any file type, super handy. I'm also using it right now. I'm just tangent about it, but I'm also using it to create um, some a JSON view of my pages that gets used in the feed and in the sitemap auto creation. Really cool stuff. If you check out the header comments of Style Stage, you'll see the link to 11D starter if you're interested. I absolutely look forward to contributions, and yeah, so get those in. It's been fun. I published a little bit more from a philosophical of the project on my Dev2 account. So I will publish that right after this stream. If any lingering questions about how it came about, why we need this. Um, but for those looking to contribute, again, the steps are all on the main page. And don't forget to check out the guidelines page with additional FAQ and resources page that will give you some tips on constructing your style sheet. Didn't quite. Thanks again.